A Senate showdown right now on KIRO-7. The sitting senator squares off against the doctor. Your money, your safety, and your health. The candidates taking your biggest questions as we fight for the answers you deserve. Will Senator Maria Cantwell earn a fifth term, or will Dr. Raul Garcia swing the seat? KIRO-7's U.S. Senate debate starts right now. And we are welcoming both candidates to the stage. Senator Maria Cantwell, Dr. Raul Garcia, thank you so much for both being here today. And thank you at home for joining us. I am your moderator, Monique Minglavin. And today, with the help of some great questions from you, we will be addressing the biggest issues facing our state. And you're in for a spirited debate today, so let's meet our candidates. First, the incumbent, Senator Maria Cantwell from Edmonds. The Democrat has held public office for more than 30 years, including as U.S. Senator for Washington since 2001. She has also worked in the private tech sector in Washington. Now her challenger is Republican Dr. Raul Garcia. Dr. Garcia is originally from Cuba and now lives in Yakima. He has worked as a physician for 26 years and is the medical director at Astria Toppenish Hospital. Dr. Garcia has not yet held an elected office, but he has years of community service. Now, both candidates have agreed to rules for this debate. There will be no opening statements, but they will have time at the end for closing statements. And you at home will hear pre-recorded questions directly from Washingtonians. I will also ask questions formulated with help from the League of Women Voters, a nonpartisan political group that neither opposes nor endorses candidates or political parties. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer each question. Now, candidates may call for a 30-second rebuttal once during the debate. My primary role is to ensure the questions are answered and to ask follow-up or clarifying questions as needed, and 30 seconds will also be given to respond to those. Now, Dr. Garcia won a coin toss before the debate. He opted to go second, so Senator Cantwell will go first, and we'll alternate from there. And let's get started with a basic but important question. Why do you believe you are the best candidate to represent the people of Washington in the U.S. Senate? Senator Cantwell, you first.
Well, thank you, Monique, for that question. And thank you to KIRO. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you to Dr. Garcia. I'm here to ask the Washingtonians that I know and love so much for ability to continue to fight for us. I went to Washington not to argue with my colleagues, not to get on cable TV at night, but to get things done. And we passed three major bills: the Inflation Reduction Act, which basically helped put a cap on prescription drug prices, both for out-of-pockets for seniors and insulin at $35. It got us negotiated rates that is helping us save money, just like when you buy at Costco, you get a discount. We deserve in the Medicare budget to get that discount too. We passed an infrastructure bill that helped us build the West Seattle Bridge, and it's helping us get light rail to Snohomish County. And it's done so many other things. And we also passed the CHIPS and Science Act so we could bring our supply chain home, increase jobs here in the state of Washington, and drive down costs. That is so important. So I want to continue that work because we have created so many jobs. We have seen them in our Northwest economy. But what we need to do now is train and skill people for the jobs of tomorrow that are here today. I want to fight for those apprenticeships, increase wages, and lower costs.
Thank you very much, Senator. Dr. Garcia, why do you believe you are the best candidate to represent our state in the Senate?
Well, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Raul Garcia, and I'm here to be our next U.S. Senator to represent the people of Washington. I want to thank the League of Women Voters and KIRO-7 for putting this debate together. I especially want to thank Senator Cantwell for being here and recognize 24 years representing the United States of America. You know, public service is not easy. And as I say that, I want to thank my wife for her support. Without her, I wouldn't be here today. But mainly, I want to thank you, the viewers, who care enough to view this debate and care about our future. Tenemos una linda oportunidad de elegir el primer senador nacional latinoamericano en la historia de Washington. Quiero representar nuestra cultura, nuestros ideales, pero principalmente asegurar el futuro de nuestros niños. I hope that everybody watching this debate will see a contrast and a choice, not from a career politician with polished answers, but from an immigrant that fought hard for the American dream, was lucky enough to become a doctor, a medical leader, a professor, a dean, a medical director, a business owner, but more importantly, a father and a husband, and a scientist that would look at all our problems and bring science into politics, and according to results, come out with solutions that are effective.
Thank you. Gracias to you both for that opening question. Now we're going to turn to the cost of living. Washingtonians are struggling with a rising cost of living. The basic necessities, including food, housing, gas. Inflation in Washington state has consistently outpaced the national average. One example here, grocery prices up by over 7% in the past 2 years. So here's the question. What specific measures would you support to address inflation? Dr. Garcia.
Thank you, Monique. Well, we are in a bad situation. We have had numerous families now go to food banks to get food because they can't afford it. They put their groceries on credit cards. You know, I have 4 children that put gas in their car every month, and eventually they call me to see if I could help them out. We need true answers, and disinflation has been a result of largely government spending. I think that we need to cut our government spending, and think that we need to audit our federal government and see what programs are effective and what programs are ineffective. And those ineffective programs turn into money that we could bring back to our communities so we could have more money. And Economics 101 tells us that if we have more money in our pockets, we spend more money in our communities, and then growth happens. You know, Senator Cantwell talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, but unfortunately, that has proven to not lower inflation. As a matter of fact, it has raised it. And academicians all over the country have said that this was not going to be good, and continue to say that the results of the Inflation Reduction Act, especially for the state of Washington, we have been the piggy bank for the rest of the country. That means that we have put more taxes into it than we have rewarded from that IRA. So better solutions need to happen. We deserve better.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Senator Cantwell, what specific measures would you support to address inflation?
Well, thank you, Monique. It's so important because we had a global pandemic and obviously the situation in Ukraine that affected all sorts of prices. So first and foremost, it was to get through the pandemic and, as I said earlier, bring the supply chain back to the United States and lower costs. But right now, we've gone from 9% inflation down to 2.5% today, but it's still not enough. We need to see lower prices. When a Kroger executive says that he knows that he raised grocery prices above the rate of inflation, that is just not right. So I am opposing the Kroger merger because the Kroger-Albertson merger will give less choice and increase costs. Secondly, I believe in building more affordable housing. For every 2,000 units that get built in a city, that lowers the annual rent by about $2,000 for those individuals. So building more supply will also help us because housing is still one of the stingiest aspects. And I also believe in giving more people access to lower prescription drug costs. This notion that we now got a cap on insulin at $35 for seniors is something that everybody on insulin deserves to have. And certainly being able to negotiate on drug prices and these PBM middlemen who are basically taking money out of our pharmacies like Kelly Ross Pharmacy here that actually had to close because of PBMs and their clawbacks. We need to stop that, and I have a bill in the Senate to do so.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. We're going to move on to public safety right now because this remains a top concern for Washingtonians. Violent crime in our state decreased by 4.8% from 2022 to 2023, but it remains more than 23% higher than in 2019 before the pandemic. Now that outpaces the national average, and the drug crisis, particularly fentanyl, contributes significantly to crime. So what would you do as senator to address public safety? Senator Cantwell.
Well, thank you, Monique. First of all, fentanyl is a scourge on our society, and we passed a law, the Fend Off Fentanyl Act, to make it an emergency nationally. That is giving us more resources here in Seattle to fight this pandemic, and we also are this crisis that we have. We also are helping with law enforcement what they've requested, new technologies to detect the vapors of fentanyl so we can detect it sooner. But I believe in putting more community police into our communities. The notion that we have put 136,000 policemen from the federal level to help places like Seattle or to help Tacoma or to help Spokane is a critical part of helping the local law enforcement in their communities. It's important because the community policing is about knowing your community and helping stop that crime. In Bellevue, where they've had a full fleet of officers and these community programs, they've had more success at fighting this. I think we should learn a little bit from what the mayor of Bellevue has done.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Dr. Garcia, what would you do as senator to address public safety?
Well, public safety, as I've traveled around the state, is the #1 thing on everybody's mind. You know, we all have children, and we want them to be safe when they're out there playing. Our streets aren't safe. And I think that we need to change the culture to reinforce our support for law enforcement. Seattle itself is 375 policemen under. We can't take the 911 calls and be there on time if we do that. Second, we need to revive the community relationship between law enforcement and businesses. When we had that, we knew who didn't belong in our streets. But most importantly, we need to start prosecuting small crime again. Small crime leads to bigger crime, and this is what our permissive society so far has done to our city here in Seattle and to our state, and truthfully to our country. When it comes to fentanyl, there is no bigger crisis in America. A human being is dying every 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I walked 185 miles from Toppenish Hospital to Seattle to bring awareness to this crisis and to honor everybody that has died from this senseless death. That's why I'm proposing the Americans Against Fentanyl Act, which will give manslaughter charges to drug dealers and put them in prison, and give involuntary mandatory rehab to addicts. I could tell you as a physician that their brains is telling them to lie, cheat, and steal to get that next fix, and we need to take them out of that environment.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Let me get back to you on this matter, Senator Cantwell. You mentioned community police in particular. That has seen a local resource. How would you be able to influence that as U.S. Senator?
Community policing, so that is something that we do as part of the COPS program. The COPS program, very successful effort by the federal government to help supplement what communities need as far as resources. It can be for training, it can be for skilling, and it can be for just hiring officers. It is shown in research that if you increase the capacity by 3%, then you actually lower the crime rate by 3.5%. So helping our local communities from the federal government is something I support. This was in the American Rescue Plan. It helped us, and I'll continue to support these kind of resources for Seattle and the greater cities around.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. And Dr. Garcia, let me ask you a little bit more about your idea of involuntary commitment there. Now, the process of confining someone is generally governed by state law. So how would you, as senator, influence that? You have 30 seconds.
Well, you know, I've moved to Seattle to be in the streets with the addicts, with the people affected by a program, by the problem. I have a fundamental belief that to find a true solution, you have to dive into the culture of people that are affected by it. And they all have come out and said, thank you for making that decision for me when I couldn't make it for myself. We need to take them out of that environment because their brain is not going to volunteer that, to bring them into a rehabilitation facility that is comprehensive, that includes mental health.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. I'm sorry you're out of time here. Yeah. We are going to turn now to housing. We touched on it briefly, but we're going deeper here. The price for home ownership remains out of reach for many low and middle class families in Washington. According to Redfin, the median home price in our state is up more than 52% from 2020. Now, with that as the backdrop, here is a question from viewer Ryan Donahue from Renton.
What specific policies would you advocate for to increase the availability of affordable home ownership?
Now, if you were unable to hear that question, Ryan said, what specific policies would you advocate for to increase the availability of affordable home ownership? Dr. Garcia.
Well, unfortunately, housing is a big issue in our state. and one that we should pay very close attention to and give more resources to. Now, this is largely a state issue, but the federal government, we spend a lot of money helping states with housing. My wife was a product of affordable housing, and I remember, you know, when I got here from Cuba, my mother and I lived in an apartment that is half the size of this studio, that we paid $110 a month. She lived in that apartment for 24 years until I graduated from a residency and was able to buy her a home. And I remember the picture of her face when she came into her new home. What our friend is asking us is about being able to have that affordability to buy a home. And I want to come up with something that, according to results, bringing science into politics, has worked. VA loans have worked because veterans don't have to come up with a down payment to buy a house. I want to turn that into the regular public. Let's have programs with our lenders that our regular citizens could afford to buy a house without a down payment. They still have to qualify, but in our economy today, it's very hard to come up with a down payment. The other idea is zero-based regulations. Let's start building more homes with less obstacles so we could find a true solution.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Senator Cantwell, Ryan's question to you again. What specific policies would you advocate for to increase the availability of affordable home ownership?
Well, thank you. This crisis that we have in the inflation rate impacting housing is that we haven't built enough supply. We need to build more affordable housing across the United States of America. I had a sheriff in Eastern Washington tell me he tried to hire a deputy who accepted the job, but then basically called back and said, even in my rural county, I can't afford to live there. So I am the leader in the United States Senate with a Republican colleague, Todd Young of Indiana, to increase the capacity of the affordable low-income housing tax credit. This tax credit is 95% of the affordable housing that gets built with this tax credit. Yesterday, I was at a site, Madrona Heights in Edmonds, Washington, that was the opening of an affordable project just like this. And what was it doing? It was providing workforce and previous homeless people housing. There's a grocery store right across the street. They came over and said, can I hire some of these people because we need a workforce with the holidays coming up. So building capacity is important. We can't have firefighters and police officers and nurses traveling 3 counties away just to have affordable housing. We need to build more supply. So unfortunately, this bill got stopped by some of my Republican colleagues. When we go back in the lame duck, I hope that we will get it over the goal line. We need to have a significant increase to build thousands of new units in the state of Washington.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. Dr. Garcia, let me ask you a little bit about the impediments to building that you referenced. Are you talking about zoning, or what are you referring to that you as U.S. Senator could influence? 30 seconds, please.
Well, I have a lot of contractor friends that want to build, but they say permits are multiple. The time that it takes for them to try and build is excessive. The regulations are not about safety of housing. There are other regulations that don't pertain to fast access to building these affordable housings. And truly, they tell me, when we finish with it, it's not affordable because of all the regulations that we have had to follow.
I'm sorry, you're out of time there.
Yeah.
Senator Cantwell, my follow-up for you. You referenced legislation that has failed. If it's failed in the past, how can you bring this across the finish line?
Well, I actually was successful in getting a bump to this program in 2018, and it lasted for about 4 years. I wanted it to continue because we needed to build more supply. But even that little bit of supply helped us in the state of Washington add additional projects. So now what I'm trying to do is raise the voices. AARP is supporting my legislation. So they are one of those voices that is saying, let's get this over the goal line and hold members accountable.
Thank you, Senator. Our next topic is health care, and Robin from Silverdale wrote to us, concerned about what she calls health care deserts.
Kitsap County is now considered a healthcare desert, in large part due to the downsizing of Naval Hospital Bremerton. It can take over a year to see some providers in our area.
Well, again, if you were unable to hear, Robin said Kitsap County is now considered a healthcare desert in a large part due to the downsizing of Naval Hospital Bremerton, and it can take a year to see some providers in our area. So adding to that right now, the average American's healthcare costs in 2023 totaled $12,900. That is up from 2019 when it was $11,500. Now, higher costs for hospital care, prescription drugs, and insurance premiums are factors. So, what action would you take to make healthcare more affordable and accessible for someone like Robin in Kitsap County? Senator Cantwell.
We need to make healthcare more affordable. It's going to be a continued task. But obviously, we focused on prescription drugs right away, and we need to build more capacity for primary care physicians. And this is one of the reasons why the Affordable Care Act was so important to do. The Affordable Care Act increased capacity to see more people at clinics and to give them access in different ways than just a hospital facility. So now what we need to do is continue to drive down the cost, as I was mentioning, on healthcare, because part of our whole healthcare system is the enormous amount that goes to prescription drugs that PBMs and others are driving huge costs on. But I believe in giving more access, besides growing more primary care physicians, with the University of Washington as a lead in the nation in, so giving them more resources to train and skill people, to also increase access to telehealth and telemedicine. It's not the only solution for the person who just asked in Kitsap County, but it is the answer for driving down cost overall in healthcare. So I want to bolster what we've done in the Affordable Care Act and extend more cost-effective insurance to those individuals and get more coverage. I remember being in Kitsap County, and the hospital told me there, sometimes one person visiting the hospital on a repeated basis because they didn't have insurance ended up costing that hospital hundreds of thousands of dollars of uncompensated care. So let's get everybody covered in our state.
Thank you, Senator. Dr. Garcia, what action would you take to make healthcare more affordable and accessible?
Well, healthcare is somewhere that we can do better. You know, I'm an emergency physician, and I've been at the other end of holding patients because we don't have medical beds in the state of Washington. And what has happened in our country is that healthcare is no longer controlled by physicians and patients. They're controlled by insurance companies. And to that, we need some better solutions. I propose that we deregulate some rules so a citizen of Washington could actually get a quote from any state in the country for insurance, that way lowering their cost and bringing more power to their hands. I also don't know that insurance companies, although I believe in free enterprise and that they can make money, that they should be on Wall Street answering to investors instead of the patients that need an MRI or another study and are being denied. But healthcare deserts is a real thing. You know, OBGYN has had many closures over the past few years and truly under Senator Cantwell's watch. And the women of Washington need health care. We're not talking about the issues of autoimmune disease and perimenopause and cancer and all these things that are popping up in women's health care now, and we don't have the OBGYN facilities to provide that care. Mental health is another healthcare desert. I was in Everton, Washington, with the first urgent care for mental health for children. That is a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. And I'm sorry, I'm not sure that I actually heard an answer from either of you to the second part of Robin's question, which was, what would you do to address these healthcare deserts specifically?
So there is a bill in the United States Senate that myself, Senator Wyden, is the lead on, that is trying to fight to make sure that we give more access and more cost reimbursements to these facilities. We need to have rural health care. We need to have capacity for that, and this would help stabilize it. But I do think, I don't have time in 30 seconds, but maybe you can ask me a follow-up. But there are some strategies that some of our other counties have deployed, pooling the physicians together across the county, that have allowed them to help keep the care within the community.
Thank you very much, Senator. Dr. Garcia, how would you address the healthcare deserts?
Well, Monique, in 2008, I visited Senator Cantwell and I warned her that lower reimbursements from our government would make us lose services in Washington State. And her response was that we were going to bring all the other reimbursements down to our level. And certainly that has not worked out. What I propose is for Congress to open up the critical access designation for these rural hospitals to be able to have better reimbursement, and they could afford all these services and then bring those services to the community.
Thank you both very much.
I want to just follow up on this because this is an important point.
Each one of you, just so the people at home understand, each of you has the opportunity to have one more 30-second rebuttal. You're exercising.
So my opponent has said he thought the Affordable Care Act failed. And it obviously increased capacity across the state of Washington, not just in covering more people on insurance, but helping those facilities, those critical access hospitals, and creating clinic access to people who didn't have care. So what we're trying to do now, and the University of Washington is the lead on this, they actually have an innovation grant that basically is saying, how do we help pool the resources of physicians, get people to work collaboratively together, increase the access and reimbursement to telehealth, and reward them with a value, and that's a higher reward.
That's your 30 seconds, and we're going to move on unless you were going to exercise your rebuttal as well. Okay, so we are switching now to women's reproductive rights. In the last 2 years, the landscape has drastically changed across the U.S. following the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. 13 states have now banned abortion access. That includes our neighbor, Idaho. Now, meanwhile, an Associated Press poll in June found 70% of Americans think abortion should be legal in most cases. A viewer named Gilda submitted this question for you. As a senator from Washington State, what do you believe is the state's role in protecting women's reproductive care? And will you support national legislation to safeguard reproductive rights, including a woman's right to choose? Dr. Garcia.
Well, the short answer is yes. We live in Washington State, and the voters of Washington State have made it very clear that this is a pro-choice state. And as your next United States Senator, I am going to protect and defend that choice. I know the Dobbs decision has caused a lot of anxiety and mistrust in our government, and I'm asking every woman in the state of Washington to trust who I am and what I have stood for. I am the physician that has prescribed contraceptives. I'm the physician that has been there at bedside when a mother had her daughter raped by her uncle. A husband had his wife almost dying of an ectopic pregnancy, a fetal demise, or other OB emergencies, that we have to send those patients to the operating room to terminate that pregnancy, or those women will die. My wife was a trauma nurse that is specialized in sexual assault. I have a long career where I would never handicap the medical profession from performing procedures that are life savings. So the long answer is yes. I think there should be a safety net all over our country for those women that choose to have an abortion to do so. The Dobbs decision has caused a burden on Washington, bringing other patients to our health care to provide those procedures, because those states don't.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Senator Cantwell, what do you believe is the state's role in protecting women's reproductive care, and will you support national legislation to safeguard reproductive rights, including a woman's right to choose?
I think a woman's right to choose is a constitutional right to privacy. I would hope all Washingtonians would view this as an issue of our freedom. This should be a decision between a woman and her physician, not a politician, not somebody in government. My opponent will definitely go cast a vote for a Republican leader, and their agenda in Washington is to stop Roe v. Wade. They, in fact, are often leaders in trying to stop even IVF. So what I want to do is go back to Washington and fight to codify Roe v. Wade into national law. While our state has passed this by initiative, we are now seeing the strains in our state of people coming from Idaho and other states just to get reproductive care. You might be coming from Idaho and you want to keep a child. In the complexity of your pregnancy, they don't want to see you and they ask you to go to Seattle. That's not the way the United States of America should work. Reproductive choice should be the law of the land across the United States.
Thank you, Senator. Dr. Garcia, your rebuttal there. You have 30 seconds to respond to what the senator just said.
Yes, I want to make sure that everyone is clear on my position, and whether we have a Republican leader or a Democrat leader, these are issues that affect our everyday family. You know, one of my mentors was Dan Evans, and Governor Evans said that he'd rather cross the aisle than cross the people of Washington. And that is my mentality. I'm going to do what's best for the people of Washington. I'm going to represent their ideals, and in this case, is to uphold and protect that pro-choice status that our state is.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Garcia. We're going to move to immigration right now, a hot button issue across the country. And we have a pretty straightforward question now from Susan Martin from San Juan Island.
Earlier this year, a comprehensive bipartisan bill on immigration and border security failed to pass in Congress. Would you support this bill if it comes up again?
Well, I know you'd like me to repeat this question. So Susan, again, she asked earlier this year, a comprehensive bipartisan bill on immigration and border security failed to pass in Congress. Would you support this bill if it came up again? Senator Cantwell.
Well, I did support this legislation. We do want to increase border security. It was a compromise. I have voted for, I think, 4 or 5 different compromises for border security, starting way back with Larry Craig, an Idaho senator, and Ted Kennedy. And so once again, a very constructive bipartisan bill that would have put more resources into protecting our border got killed by Republicans who'd rather campaign on the issue than actually solve the issue. What's really important, I think, to Washingtonians is that we take care of our dreamers, that we have a comprehensive immigration law that allows people to come here and work and then return to their home country like so many people do from Mexico. And to make sure that we continue to focus on what is the right asylum laws, not, as President Trump tried to do, put kids in cages or separate families. This bill that was done by my colleague Senator Langford, a Republican from Oklahoma, and Senator Sinema, was a great idea to try to put this to rest and give the resources to the border. But Republicans chose to kill it. So that's why I want to make sure when we go back, we do take another attempt to get this over the goal line.
Okay, thank you, Senator Dr. Garcia. Earlier this year, a comprehensive bipartisan bill on immigration and border security failed to pass in Congress. Would you support this bill if it comes up again?
Well, I wasn't there for the bill and to study it, but I like the word bipartisan. You know, as I just said, I'm a Dan Evans Republican, and I think that the answers lie in the middle. And if we have a bipartisan bill for immigration, it would be hard not to vote for it. You know, I was an immigrant to this country. I could tell you about the night that I arrived in Miami, and there were a lot of people. They were at that airport to receive me. That fire that my mother had to come to this country is the fire that every immigrant that comes to this country has. Y quiero decirle a todos los inmigrantes que yo siempre los representaré. The dreamers came to this country under 18, not to their fault that they broke the law, and I don't know why we haven't given them citizenship already. The other individuals that have been here that did break the law but have lived great lives here are our neighbors. We don't even know that they're illegal. We should have a path to legalization, maybe a permanent residency. And for those that break the law, no, you won't come to our country to break the law. I understand that Washington State relies a lot on our economy relies on immigrants. That's why I'm a big proponent of H-2B and H-2A workers, and I will always support immigrants in this country and be a champion of them.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Just to clarify here, Senator Cantwell, that bill came up for a vote again in May, and when it was divorced from some aid to Ukraine and some other matters, you lost some Democrats in that vote as well. But you were saying that you would stick with this bill as is if it were to come up again?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It's, I mean, we obviously have a legislative process, but yes, the core of this deal is to, again, have some normalization of our immigration process and put more resources on the border. And that's an important thing, to have a bipartisan bill, not have Republicans kill it because they'd rather talk about the issue than actually solve it.
Thank you. And Dr. Garcia, if it were bipartisan and supported by members of both parties, you would support?
I would support it. You know, every sovereign nation deserves the right to vet who comes in and out of their country. And when we lose that, we are no longer sovereign. The embarrassing point for our government today is that we don't know who's coming in and out of our country, but the cartels do know exactly who's coming in out of our country. We need some more discipline and leadership at that border, but again, support immigration 100%.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Now, we have covered a lot of ground so far, but we're going to take a quick break right now. We're addressing the climate crisis and efforts to keep your kids safe online. When we return, that's in about 2.5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to KIRO-7's U.S. Senate debate. If you are just tuning in, the two candidates, Senator Maria Cantwell on my left, Dr. Raul Garcia on my right, they have been addressing the biggest issues facing our state. And we continue now with the topic of online safety. The average child spends 4 to 6 hours per day looking at a screen. That's according to a study this year conducted by the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. Now, for teenagers, that number is closer to 9 hours per day online. The Surgeon General recently issued an advisory about social media having a negative impact on the mental health of children. And the FTC is raising the alarm on how companies are collecting children's data. So what would you do at a federal level to ensure children and their data are safe? Senator Cantwell.
Well, we've been working hard on this issue. We actually passed 2 bills out of the United States Senate that put more restrictions on social media companies to communicate with the tools themselves, to allow parents to limit some access their children have to those websites, and to put new penalties in place against those companies. Unfortunately, conservative elements in the House of Representatives stymied those bills moving any further to the House floor. I'm going to continue to fight to get those over the goal line. I also introduced legislation with my Republican colleague, Cathy McMorris-Rodgers from Spokane, on a major privacy bill that would give the United States citizenry the ability of a privacy right. If these companies violate your most personal information and cause serious harm to you, you should have your day in court and be able to go and stop these bad actors from the things that they have done with your information. In the world of AI, we can't have insurance companies who know how you drove your car and then charge you more. We can't have somebody like Uber see that your battery on your phone is about to die and charge you a higher rate. We can't have hospitals who sell information about or make information through the network available who's there in the hospital at that time. We need to have some rules of the road for everyone, but especially get these kids' bills over the goal line.
Thank you, Senator. Dr. Garcia, what would you do at a federal level to ensure children and their data are safe?
Well, you don't know the times that I have sat at the dinner table and asked our children to get off their phone and to live present in our house instead of whatever environment they're in on their phone. And I wouldn't say that the government needs to get into that. That is, our jobs as parents. But the government's job is to protect the privacy of our citizens and the privacy especially of our children. And I will support any piece of legislation that will enable us to have that privacy. Senator Cantwell talked about the bill that she has put forward with Cathy McMorris-Rodgers, a friend of mine and a mentor. And I'm happy that Senator Cantwell has come to our side on these privacy issues, meaning we believe in privacy. Unfortunately, the Washington Post had an article about Senator Cantwell talking about her being the biggest impediment for privacy over our internet over the last few years. So I'm glad that we're all on the same page now. Privacy is of the utmost importance for the government to protect its citizens and for us to feel that our internet interactions are private and that our information is ours and ours alone, not anybody else's to get.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. I'm guessing one of the things your kids are paying attention to is TikTok. So a quick follow-up for both of you. Would you support a ban on TikTok, Senator?
Well, I had to work with my House colleagues, Republicans and Democrats, the White House, the FBI, the Department of Justice, the State Department, and craft a solution that basically allowed our federal government to say that the Chinese government can't have an outsized role in the information that is on TikTok. That now has passed, went to the president's desk, and was signed. What we're asking for is to just make sure that no deleterious information by a foreign government affects U.S. citizens or our U.S. military.
Thank you, Senator. Dr. Garcia, would you support a ban on TikTok?
Oh, absolutely. I think that what was passed was the right thing for us to do. Again, privacy is paramount, and not only for companies out there to get our information for their benefit of making money, but for another government to have our information for strategic planning. That should never be the case. So yes, I 100% support it.
Thank you, Doctor. And we're going to move along now to the subject of climate change. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, last year, a record 28 disasters cost taxpayers more than $92 billion. Now, recently, Congress allocated $20 billion to FEMA for hurricane season, and $9 billion, almost half of that, was spent in 1 week following back-to-back hurricanes in the southeast. So that brings us to this question from our viewer, Ellie, on Mercer Island.
Hurricanes Milton and Helene have reminded us all that no place is safe from the increasing effects of climate change. What are the most important policies you believe Congress could pass to reduce carbon emissions?
So Ellie's question there, Dr. Garcia, what are the most important policies you believe Congress could pass to reduce carbon emissions?
Well, I think that I have said already that one of my mentors in my life was Governor Dan Evans, who created the Department of Ecology here in Washington to preserve how pristine and beautiful our state is. And I think that we all need to make sure that this is something that we cross the aisle to work, Democrats and Republicans, to keep our environment as clean as we have it for our children. Hurricane Helene and Milton bring up another subject. Look, I grew up in Miami. It was always obvious that we were going to have a couple of hurricanes in Florida every year. And I think it is outstanding that the government is still not ready for it. We see in the news that people are without food, without electricity, without water. We know these things are coming. And as a physician during COVID, I could tell you it was very frustrating to sit there and have to wait for PPE to come from China because we were not ready for that pandemic. We need to have a rainy day fund. We need to be prepared for natural disasters, and we need to preserve our environment. Our country has the strictest laws on preserving our environment. Let's bring manufacturing and industries back to America instead of outsourcing it to countries that don't care about the environment.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Senator Cantwell, what are the most important policies you believe Congress could pass to reduce carbon emissions?
I'm going to get to that, but I wanted to just say, Monique, I want to make clear, the legislation we passed regarding TikTok said that we just couldn't have government influence. Hopefully they'll sell it to somebody and they'll continue to operate, but just not with the interference of a foreign actor. Climate change is critical. We must address it. We have been able to successfully diversify our grid from 52% reliant on coal on a national basis down to 19%. I have helped in those policies that have incented clean energy, wind, solar, biofuels. Also now with the hydrogen hubs, looking at everything from battery technology at our PNNL labs to doing everything we can to diversify hard to decarbonize sectors. Our challenge of the moment is we've done a good job of getting the industry moving towards electric vehicles. And now we're talking about aviation jet fuel that would be from a cleaner source. But there are hard to decarbonize sectors, maritime being one of those, agriculture being one of those, and making sure that we make progress on industry that uses heavy chemicals. So what the Inflation Reduction Act did is it put into law more incentives and clarity for a longer period of time so we can continue to unleash the hundreds of thousands of jobs that have been created in these new innovation sectors. That innovation, higher wages, is helping us diversify off of fossil fuel.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. You have shared your differences civilly and respectfully today, but it brings us to this next question, which is, according to a Gallup poll from last month, a record high 80% of American adults believe the nation is divided on its most important values. That division is also evident on Capitol Hill with partisan gridlock. So the question here, if elected, how will you prioritize country over party to work across the aisle? And what actions would you take to protect and strengthen our democracy? Senator?
Well, thank you. I had to do this. I actually saw people storm the Capitol. I saw the discourse that came from people just getting on cable TV every night and just arguing instead of trying to solve problems. I made a commitment that I knew that our state didn't send me there to just argue. You sent me to get things done. And so we passed one of the most monumental pieces of legislation, the CHIPS and Science Act, in the aftermath of that attack on our Capitol. Why? Yes, it was very important policy. It was. Bring the supply chain home. Don't be overdependent on Taiwan. Drive down the cost of things. Unleash manufacturing. There's thousands of chips in cars, in computers, in planes. It was important. But it was also important to show the rest of the world that the United States wasn't so divided as that showed on the steps of the Capitol, and instead pass monumental legislation that brought the innovation investment into the United States. Billions of dollars of private sector investment has now been unleashed across the country. And not only that, it is helping us grow the middle class again. This policy of having the manufacturing supply chain come back is critical. Now, we got to do other things, Monique. We have to save local journalism. I'm the leader in the United States Senate in fighting to make sure that we stave off what the social media companies have done to our local community, both newspapers and radio and TV stations. But we're going to continue to fight for that.
That's the time, but thank you for looking out for my job. I appreciate that. Dr. Garcia, if elected, how will you prioritize country over party to work across the aisle, and what actions would you take to protect and strengthen our democracy?
You know, when I came from Cuba, I never thought that I would get in a football game in America where Democrats were competing against Republicans. When I came from Cuba, I thought of a country that had freedom of speech, that had freedom to do anything you wanted, that had the best innovation in the world, that were always leading. And those people were Americans. And I fell in love with America before ever stepping foot in this country. Coming from a totalitarian system, I could tell you that appreciating what that American dream means is not lost on me. And I have fought hard throughout my life to defend this country for what it's worth, for what it stands, for what we created with that fire to build a better place in the world than anything else. You know, I've already said a couple of times that I'm a Dan Evans Republican, and he said, I'd rather cross the aisle than cross the people of Washington. And that's what I intend to do in the United States Senate, with hard decisions, you know, talking about abortion, talking about climate change, talking about the topics that usually my party doesn't have great answers to so far. Well, I want to bring my scientific mind to politics and be a bipartisan group that is proud to be Americans.
Thank you both very much. We are nearing actually the end of our time. This has gone quickly. Now each candidate will now have 90 seconds for their closing statements. And according to that coin flip done before we began, Senator Cantwell, we start with you.
I'm asking for your support in this race for the United States Senate. As I said earlier, I didn't go to Washington to argue with people or get on cable TV. I went there to get things done. And we've been able to do things that are lowering cost and increasing wages. And we have an opportunity to grow the middle class again, to make our country the land of upward mobility. This is so important to us. We need to invest in skilling and training people in apprenticeships. We need to invest more at our colleges, community colleges, to help high schoolers who want to take courses while they're still in high school, and continue to invest in those policies that are going to help us lower costs, like on prescription drugs, stopping these middlemen who are pocketing so much money. They're literally causing problems here in our communities by closing pharmacies, and continuing to make sure that we as the United States stand up, like on privacy, and continue to advance the health care that we need. I'm going to defend a woman's right to choose. I am going to fight for what Washingtonians know is what they deserve in their lives. So I ask for your support, and I thank again KIRO TV and the League of Women Voters for having us here in this debate.
Thank you very much. Dr. Garcia, you have 90 seconds.
Well, I want to thank everybody for this great opportunity. And my goal was to instill in you the confidence and the hope that together we could build a better Washington. I know that change is hard. Now, my opponent has asked you 4 times to give her another chance at making it right. I'm asking you for one time. As a healer and a candidate for unity, I ask today for your vote. But more than that, I ask you to join me in creating a new path forward for the future, that we can put away the shadows of death in the streets, of division, of the things that we want to change in our communities, and give America a new morning. Washingtonians have always been pioneers. Well, let us be the example of accepting our diversities and unifying and giving America that new morning where we don't have these problems anymore. As your next United States Senator, I promise you that I will be present and reliable for Washington State to make these changes happen. And every day, with every step that I take and every action that I take as your U.S. Senator, I will defend the greatest country in the world, and I will pay her back for everything it's done for me.
Thank you very much, Dr. Garcia. Now, we hope this debate shed light on issues close to you and you feel better prepared to vote this election. If you tuned in late, you can watch this debate in its entirety on our website, KIRO7.com/debate. You can also scan this QR code to watch. This is far from the only race on the ballot this year. KIRO7 just completed a special on the governor's race, diving into key issues from the 2 candidates there, Dave Reichert and Bob Ferguson. Now, we pressed the candidates on similar topics you saw discussed here today, like reproductive rights.
And hopefully the viewers will know after this interview that the governor has no authority to change the abortion law. So the fact that we're talking about this really has no impact on what I'm going to do or be able to do as the governor, minus my personal beliefs.
There are things that are going on outside of our border that can impact our access to that reproductive freedom. That's why having a governor who supports it and will act on it is critical.
Now, that special is available now on KIRO7.com, and you can also watch the full unedited interviews on our website by scanning that QR code on your screen right there. And you responsible citizens, keep your eyes peeled for ballots. State law requires all counties to send them out by tomorrow at the latest. If you are not registered, you can register online or by mail through October 28th. You can also register in person at your local elections office through 8 p.m. on Election Day. Be sure to submit your signed ballot in an official drop box by 8 p.m. on November 5th. And thank you again so much for joining us today on KIRO-7. We really hope you are now able to make informed decisions. Please make sure your voice is heard this election.